I'm Dylan Nolan. You're Liam Ford. We last spoke, what, 6 months ago now, I guess, about a week after the events on January 6th. And I spoke to you because you were there, not entering the building. In fact, you left, what, like an hour before that, once things started getting weird over there?
Yeah, um, we left DC pretty quickly as well. We kind of stopped at the hotel and then left because kind of saw the way things were headed and didn't necessarily want to be around for it or caught in the crossfire or however that was going to play out the day of. And then obviously in the months since, turns out to probably have been a very good decision.
Yeah, you haven't had a letter or a knock at the door since then.
Just for the vaccine, not for
Right.
my events, not for the events on January 6th.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll all be getting knocks at the door, those of us who are not in the vaccine club yet.
Yeah.
So, of course, I think I said this at the beginning of our last conversation, but there are some things that both of us would probably like to talk about, but that we probably would be ill-advised to talk about, given that this will be going on YouTube, and I enjoy having the ability to post things on YouTube, and they enjoy taking things down, especially if they talk about, like, right now it seems to be alternative treatments for COVID, election integrity, and actually the vaccine itself even.
Yeah. It's a long list of unauthorized opinions. Let's just put it that way. And unfortunately, we don't seem to have the freedom that people seem to think they have.
Yeah, there's a thin veil there where, and I understand, when spend your whole life as a conservative arguing for the ability of companies in the free market to make choices that they want to make, but it is a little scary when you see the lockstep moves of big tech and also the direct links that they seem to have with the executive branch of the federal government as to what
Yeah.
they choose to allow and not allow.
Yeah. I mean, it's not even like subtle anymore, is it? I mean,
No,
Taki
I
said
mean,
like
it used
a
to
couple of days ago,
be,
she says that they are flagging content for Facebook, right? So there's not a veneer, there's not a veil, there's not any pretense anymore that they aren't working together. And of course, I mean, you can look on LinkedIn and there's, dozens of job openings in all of these major companies for, policy consultants or government liaisons or all of these different positions that obviously are working with, state, local, federal governments because they are working together. Like, and there's no denying it anymore. And I think that is a real problem that conservatives have kind of shied away from because of, we're individualistic, our love of the free market, all of that kind of weakened our position on this for too long, especially some of the older generations of conservatives, I think. So it is a problem that is going to have to be dealt with, not just for conservatives, but for, anybody who wants to live in a free country.
And how do you see platforms like, obviously, Parler didn't make it too long, but Gab is still out there, as
Mm-hmm.
is Odyssey and Rumble. I don't know if you know, but Trump said he would go on Rumble if they started doing hate speech regulation, which I thought was pretty funny because that's the same path that ended up getting him booted off the rest of the social media platforms.
Yeah. So the Section 230 debate was a lot of talk for about 2 years from the Republicans, and nothing got done, which is obviously problematic because social media is how everybody communicates, how everybody is informed, how everybody gets information, basically how the world works. The world runs through social media essentially now. And the failure to get any reform, any meaningful reform on Section 230 is obviously going to have, negative consequences going forward. And what we didn't necessarily see, although it makes sense if you think about it, is kind of what that inaction means, because you see last week the DNC and Democrats coming out and saying that we need to be that cell phone providers, like reception providers, need to be monitoring text messages, specifically for vaccine disinformation. But obviously, as with everything in government, that will grow pervasively. The list of things that need to be monitored will grow pervasively. So if platforms like Twitter, Facebook are able to control and censor what is said on their legally considered platform, there's no reason that AT&T and Verizon shouldn't be able to keep you from sending text messages with the exact same content that would get you kicked off of Twitter or Facebook. And we set that precedent that they would be able to get away with that whenever we didn't do anything with Twitter or Facebook for the last 2 years. So it's kind of an interesting other side of the coin for conservatives' inability and Republicans' inability to get anything done in Congress on, reforming Section 230. As far as how it's going to actually be taken care of moving forward, I'm not sure that it will. If partly because it's a money game. The amount of money that these corporations control, the amount of power and influence that they have, not only in our society as a whole, but specifically over the politicians who would be called upon to make these regulations, I don't see it happening at a federal level. The best option I see is something to be done at a state level, like what we've seen with DeSantis propose, where, if these social media companies ban or take down content from political officers, then they would be subject to fines per day. It's like $100,000, I think. That might be effective. And it's also something that could be implemented on a statewide level because, the tech companies don't have as much influence in state houses and over governors as they do the federal branches of government. But yeah. I'm not sure that there's anything really going to be done about it.
And you see conservatives complaining all the time about states like California setting what effectively becomes federal legislation, because if you're going to sell cars in America, you're going to sell enough of them in California that you're going to comply with California law. You're not going to make a specific run of cars that you're only going to sell in California. So by setting the emission standards and whatever that they set over there, it becomes what happens across the board. And obviously it's easier to apply different standards in different regions as a technology provider, but at the same time, what are you going to do? Have Florida Facebook and Florida Twitter? No, you're going to have to make the call as to whether you're going to defy Florida for everybody or whether you're going to listen. And that means that even if you're in California where they hate Florida politicians, you're still going to be able to see them on Twitter and Facebook. And I think that you're right as to the inability of our federal legislators to get it done. I look at conservatives on Capitol Hill. It's like, okay, there's the couple hundred members of Congress, but then you have the millions of people who work for the federal government, most of which are on the far opposite side of any of these conservative legislators. And the reality is that all of the rules that we follow, that we consider to be the laws in this country, come from regulatory agencies. The legislators themselves will pass, this really broad law that says, okay, we want the air to be clean. Bam, we make the EPA. And then the EPA decides how to do that. So even if conservative legislators that would not approve of really dramatic EPA regulations vote to make the EPA exist, well, then they've lost as they've ceded power to the people on the far left who work at the EPA who promulgate the regulations. Yeah. So until we have any sort of institutional power within the regulatory agencies, hoping for anything other than liberal policy coming out of those regulatory agencies is pretty hopeless.
Yeah, and this is kind of the